We're in chapter 31 of Genesis, and I'm just going to get right into the lesson without much of an introduction, but we have been studying about the life of Jacob. Jacob has now been serving 20 years for Laban. 14 of those years were spent basically paying a price, or a dowry, if you will, for his two wives. You'll remember that Laban deceived Jacob, and he ended up marrying Leah, even though he wanted to marry Rachel. And when he found out that he had married Leah, he went to Laban and he said, "What's up with this?" And he said, "Okay, well, I'll give you Rachel also, because we always marry the older one off first. But you have to work another 7 years for me." So he agrees to work another 7 years. And so he worked his 14 years. After the 14 years was up, he went to Laban and he said, "Look, I want to go back to my homeland," which is basically where Israel is now. And Laban says, no, stay a little while longer. You know, I want you to stay. You've prospered me. You've benefited me. You've been a blessing to me. You've made me wealthy, because he was a good worker. He had a great work ethic. And so Laban convinces Jacob to stay. Jacob says, "Well, okay, I'll stay." And Laban says, "Name your price." And so he says, "All right, give me all of the, not defective, but the lambs and goats that you don't want." Now, as I mentioned last Sunday, in the Middle East, normally the sheep are white and the goats are either brown or black. But there, every once in a while, there's some spotted ones, or striped, or whatever. You know, they just have some coloring to them. And so they consider those to be less important, or less, you know, for some reason they just didn't like it that much. There weren't that many, but there were a few. And so he says, "Give me all of those, and I'll take that as my flock, and I'll raise that. And if you see any solid colored animals, like white or brown or black, in my group, you'll know that they've either been stolen or they're misplaced. So you take them with you. You take them back. Mine will be the spotted, striped goats and sheep." And Laban says, "Okay." And so in one day, they were able to gather all of the spotted and striped sheep and goats. There just weren't that many. There were very, very few. And so they gather them. Jacob puts them to his side and starts raising them and developing them, and he's taking care of Laban at the same time. David's herds grew enormously. He became very, very wealthy. And so now in his 20 years, and God has spoken to Jacob and said, "It's time for you to go back to the promised land." So Jacob understands that change is coming. And so our study is the 31st chapter of Genesis, about change and how change happens. And we'll look at some practical things that you need to do when you are facing change in your life. And so let's get right into this study, because it begins with verse 1, chapter 31, verses 1 and 2. And that is that change, since change is inevitable, and it is, everybody's going to go through change. There are some things that you need to know about change. First of all, you know change is coming when? And there are two ways that you know that change is coming. First of all, you know change is coming when circumstances indicate it. Obviously, there are circumstances are such that there is an obvious change coming into your life. Genesis 31, verses 1 through 2. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father." And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. So Jacob right away started picking up on an attitude. There was an issue. There was a problem. Things were starting to happen. Jacob, or Laban's people, were starting to gripe and gossip about Jacob. And they were saying that he had taken everything of Laban. Well, he hadn't. All he had taken were the speckled and spotted sheep and goats. But they said, you know, he took Laban's herds, and they were basically accusing him of stealing those things. And it just simply wasn't true. And then Jacob also noticed that Laban had a different attitude toward him. Well, it basically just said, the circumstances are such that the time is up. My time here is over with. You know sometimes, because of the circumstances, that change is about to happen, that things are about to end. The second way that you know that change is coming is because the Lord directs it. In verse 3, "Then the Lord said to Jacob, 'Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you.'" So there was a promise there involved, but it was directly from the Lord. "This is what I want from you." So either the circumstances direct that change is about to happen in your life, or you have this very direct message, this direct impression from the Lord that change is about to happen. Well, we are certainly going through that now in our church. Change is happening. It's not about to happen. We are going through change now. And so it's just one of those things. It happens. And the circumstances indicated for us as a church, I don't know how it is in your life, maybe a little of both. That's certainly possible. But you know change is coming when circumstances indicate it or when God directs it. Now, how do you face that change? You need to face that change in your life. If you put it on the back burner and say, I'm not ready to deal with change yet, I'm just going to continue going with the way things are, you're going to end up actually cratering. It's going to be a real problem for you. It's going to turn around and bite you. You cannot just ignore change in your life. It is inevitable, and you might as well face it. So you have to face the change. Well, how do you do that? Well, first of all, in verses 4 through 7, you need to be accountable and responsible. You need to be accountable and responsible. Look at verses 4 through 7. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. Now, this is such a fascinating few verses to me. Jacob, and this would have not necessarily been the way of the culture, but Jacob brings his 2 wives and probably his, some children together. He brings them all together, and he says, look guys, change is coming. Things are happening. And we need to make a decision here. And it's interesting that he would bring them in on the process, that he would bring them in on the decision-making process. But what he was doing was he was being accountable and responsible. He was being accountable to his wives, and he was being responsible for the family. He was being responsible to make sure that they were in and understood what was going on and why it was going to happen. You need to be accountable and responsible to the people in your life. This is an area that I have totally failed so many times in my life. I've made decisions in my life where I did not include Marcia. And trust me on this, it was damaging, not only to the relationship, but it was damaging to the choices that I made. Because I was bringing somebody on board who didn't really understand what was going on or why I made the decision or why I made the choice. I need to be accountable and responsible to Marcia when I'm making decisions and choices that affect her life. I'm not the boss of her. She's told me that. I know it's true. And so I have to be accountable to her. I cannot be responsible for her if I'm not accountable to her. Listen to what I just said. You cannot be responsible for somebody if you are not accountable to them. Nor can you be accountable to somebody if you don't take on the responsibility for them. You have to be accountable and responsible. I love how Jacob explains it. He says, guys, you know the circumstances. You know how hard I've worked. You know what my work ethic is. You know me. You know what I'm like. You know my flaws. You know my strengths. You know my weaknesses. You know me. And you also know that your dad has changed my wages 10 times. Now, when it says changed his wages 10 times, it didn't mean he got a raise. It meant that he lost money in the deal. Laban worked things around, so in 10 times over 20 years, he actually was making less than what he started out making. Laban had ripped him off, is really what it amounts to. So be accountable and responsible. Now, secondly, you need to acknowledge God's control. This is so important. You know, sometimes we think the change is ungodly. Where do we get that from? Why do we think the change is not of the Lord? I mean, God is constantly in the business of change. That's what He does. He changes lives. I mean, the very first awesome change that God did in your life was that He created you. The second awesome change that He made was that He saved you. And He's been in the process of changing you all the time to shape you into what He wants you to be. And to use you in the way He wants to use you. You are a tool in God's toolbox. And He will use you when He's ready to use you. And sometimes He's in the business of getting ready to use you the way He wants to use you. You are going to go through change in your life, and you need to acknowledge that God is in control. Even when you think that the change is coming at somebody else's hand. I will tell you, when I lost my job from the radio station, I really had a confidence that God knew what He was doing. And that things, it changed Marcia's and my whole attitude. You know, there was no fear there. I mean, I did wake up. You know, you've heard me talk about how I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning, but I call them the 4 o'clock fears. And, you know, you wake up, what if, what if, what if, what if. And I finally realized that, you know, what if really all it does is it keeps you from sleeping. So I just started going, who cares, who cares, who cares? You know. And I told Marcia, you wake up at 4 o'clock for a while and worry about things, you know, okay? You know, why should I be you know, and I'm a really good worrier too. I'm good at it. But I just feel like I need to share the burden with Marcia. So Marcia, you start worrying about things for a while, okay?
And it's only through your word